Welcome to episode 6 of the Book Blab, everyone. We are getting started a half hour late because of some technological difficulty. My worst nightmare just happened, so we apologize for that, especially since probably most of you will not now be able to participate with us live, but we hope you still watch it and still post your thoughts and comments on our blog when we put the video up with the show notes in a few days. So we're happy to have you here. We're happy to be able to do this mini book club about A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. So, but first, I actually thought, I don't know if many of our viewers know, I mean, I'm sure your viewers all know, but I don't know if mine know that you just graduated with your master's. And I just want to say in person, as much as in person this is, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really exciting. Are you, do you feel free now, or are you still really busy with other things?
No, I'm absolutely not doing anything with my life right now. It's the best.
I love it.
I know, yeah.
That's the way it should be, because
that's break.
Yeah. That's one of the beauties of doing a big accomplishment like that, is it just feels so good to relax and not have anything on your schedule. There's just, you can't beat that feeling.
Oh yeah, and my May reading is like out the wazoo, because
yeah.
I have time to read now.
I know, that's awesome. I can't wait to hear about everything that you're reading. So, okay, well, we'll jump into this episode then. So a few months ago, we thought it would be fun to host a mini book club on this Blab, and we kind of tossed around some ideas for a book to read, but you, Suzanne, came up with the idea of reading A Man Called Ove, because you had read it and loved it, and it had been on my list for a long time because I'd been hearing such great things about it, and so I was excited to read it too. So that's the book that we chose, and we hope that many of our blog readers decided to read it too and enjoyed it. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Yes. So, and I told my husband to read it, and he listened to it also, and he's not the type, he tends to like science fiction, fantasy, or nonfiction, and this
is none of those.
This is none of those. So just like a good fictional story isn't really his genre, but he really loved it and was very emotionally invested in the characters, and he cried more at the end than I did. So, and that doesn't usually happen. So yes. It's a great book.
And yeah, I suggest this book to everyone. I just had my family book club read it, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah, anyway, it's such a good book.
Yeah, so do you want to just tell our viewers a little bit about it, but just a basic plot summary?
Right, so I will say that if you haven't read it and you plan to, turn off this video now. Don't, there will be spoilers discussed, but this is kind of a spoiler-ish free summary. So the book takes place in Sweden. It was written by Frederick Bachman, who's Swedish, so it takes place in Sweden, and it's about Ove, the main character. It is pronounced Ove according to the audiobook guy, because otherwise I would call him Over. Yeah, I don't know, but
yeah,
Ove. And he is the epitome of a grumpy old man. Super crotchety, super opinionated. His world is very black and white, and things are right or things are wrong, and people who are not right and don't do things his way are stupid and useless, and so he doesn't like people. And he's basically not an easy person to get along with. And on the first page of the book, I really thought I was going to hate him.
Really?
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, what? Like,
that's interesting, yeah.
What a disagreeable old man. Anyway, but as the book moves along, as you get to know him, you can't help falling in love with him. And the book centers around a family moves in next door who's extroverted and loud and totally in his business, and they kind of their interactions with him. This is a spoiler-free summary, I guess, right here. That's sort of what the book is about. Anyway, but it is an absolute emotional roller coaster of a book, and
yes.
You are laughing your head off through most of it, and then crying, all of a sudden crying out of nowhere.
Yeah,
it's completely manipulative, but in a fabulous way. Yeah, and anyway, I loved the emotional ride. Usually, I hate books that are emotionally manipulative, but this one was just loved it. Just loved it so much. So
delightful.
Anyway, yep. There's lots to talk about in this book, though. So let's go ahead and get started. And so the first question I want to get started off with, is just a fun, light one. There are just so many funny, hilarious, laugh out loud scenes in this book. So, Amy, what is your favorite laughing scene? What made you laugh?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of moments when I was actually laughing out loud. You know, I'd be washing the dishes and just start laughing because it was just so funny. And a lot of it wasn't even, I mean, there were some scenes that were just very funny in and of themselves. But I think my personal favorite was just like the little jokes that kept coming back into play. And I don't know that Ove would call them jokes, but the reader kind of. So for those who've read it, remember that Ove loves the brand of car, a Saab. He loves to drive a Saab. He's always driven a Saab. His dad always drove one, yes, and he's very loyal. And he judges people based on the cars that they drive. And so it actually affects many of his relationships that could have otherwise been good friendships, but because they chose to drive a Volvo or whatever,
BMW.
BMW. Yes, he can't handle it. So I think I just loved all of the times that the Saab got mentioned. For example, when the reporter is locked in his garage. So a reporter comes to interview him about this life-saving event. He saved someone else's life by jumping on the train tracks and pulling them off. She wants to interview him about this, and he's in his garage, and she comes in his garage, and then he goes out and closes the door so that he won't have to talk to her. And then he freaks out a little and says, "I don't want her in there with the Saab." And I just thought that was so funny. And then there's another scene where he's teaching his neighbor to drive, and they're backing up, and she almost runs into a car, and he's freaking out that she's almost backing into the car until he realizes it's a Volvo. And then he's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Don't worry, it's a Volvo. You can back into it." So it's just little things like that. I thought that was so clever. That the car and the cat that just kept coming back into play.
The cat was
really funny. Yes. So, yeah, what was your favorite?
So this is after me initially getting over the first scene, but coming back to him buying the iPad.
Yes.
And that whole interaction with the clerk in the store and him not understanding at all what an iPad is, it just is so typical Ove, and it was perfect and hilarious. Newfangled technology, he doesn't understand it and is therefore so condescending toward it, but he, unknowns to him, is the difficult, uneducated old man to the store. Anyway, it was so funny. It's so funny how he interacts with the world.
Right. That's actually why I'm a little bit surprised that at first you thought you weren't going to like the book, because I just think it has such a great opening scene. That opening scene just had me laughing from the start.
It had me laughing too, but no, it wasn't the book. It was character. So I knew I was going to love the book. I didn't think I was going to like Ove. Oh my gosh, this man is ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that.
But it's hilarious. Sure. It's hilarious. Yeah. From the beginning, you are laughing from the first page.
And did you remember the beginning? So they open with that scene, and then they say 3 weeks before, and then they go back. Did you kind of remember that as we were then going along?
I think I completely forgot about. Well, I think there were times when I was like, when is this iPad thing gonna?
Yeah.
Is it
come back?
Because once, well, spoiler alert. Once you know that he's trying to commit suicide, that's when I was totally like, so he has to be buying an iPad before he actually goes through with suicide, right? Like,
right. Right.
So I knew it was going to happen at some point, or that something. Yeah. Anyway, like, this
something
suicide can't actually happen. He hasn't bought the iPad yet.
Yeah, I actually really liked that it started with that, and then it was like 3 weeks before, because I just felt like, well, that's actually one of the things that we were maybe going to talk about. So maybe let's jump into that, just the structure of the novel itself. So yes, it starts out present. Well, what is at that moment, present day, and then he's trying to buy the iPad, and then they go back 3 weeks before to when he's trying to commit suicide because his wife had died 6 months before, and he just misses her so much, and his life is he just doesn't even know what meaning his life has anymore, and so he's just planning to join her. And he's doing it in a very methodical way, typical of Ove. And that's when the new neighbors come. Yeah. And that's when the new neighbors move in. But then we get a lot of flashbacks going back to his childhood. Yes. And young adulthood, when he's first married. And do you tend to like novels like that with lots of flashbacks, or do you think that it kind of disrupts the plot? Or how do you feel like it
totally
affects
it? Yeah, it totally depends on how the author uses it, because flashback can be horribly confusing sometimes. In this case, though, it was absolutely brilliant, and it was part of that emotional manipulation, because it was that, like me starting off not liking Ove, but then like getting fed these little bits of his past and slowly piecing him together and figuring it out that like, oh, this completely explains everything about him and why he is the way he is, and that's how you fall in love with him is through these flashbacks and learning. And it is, I think, a very effective structure for slowly leading you into who this man is.
I totally agree, because I think you do get this initial impression of him buying the iPad, and it's not that favorable. But then as you kind of go back and look, and you find out just some of the hard things that have happened in his life, and just that those hard things have kind of created a little bit of this persona. And I just had to think, this is so true to real life. I mean, how many times do we meet someone that is just really annoying or frustrating or difficult to work with? But if we only knew the backstory, and then sometimes when we do find out the backstory, we're so much more sympathetic to them, and even like them
so much more about that.
Yes. So, yeah, I liked that. I mean, there's a part of me. So he goes through all of these hard things, his house burning down, losing both his parents. And then even once he's married to Sonia, they end up having a lot of struggles and trials. Yeah. And it's just interesting because Sonia's attitude is so different from Uva's. I mean, she is night and day. They are definitely an opposite couple. And I just was like, it's interesting that her personality isn't rubbing off on him really at all, because, and I think the reason that I'm wondering about this, because then when he meets Pravana, the neighbor, and she's bugging him, and she's irritating him, but eventually, I mean, she becomes almost like a daughter to him, and she really does soften him up, and and he's able to heal a lot of relationships and also create a lot of new friendships, kind of because he finds a reason to live again. And I feel like his personality does change in the last 5 years of his life, but I'm just curious why it hadn't changed more when he was with Sonia.
I might disagree with you there.
Okay.
I actually don't think Ove changes at all.
Oh.
In the book. I think our perspective of him changes.
Yes, I definitely think our perspective changes.
I mean, so he decides not to commit suicide because he finds a reason to live or whatever. But it's the only reason he was going to commit suicide. It wasn't necessarily depression. It was the feeling of being useless, right? Which was always one of his core values, that he needed to be useful. Because he did not commit suicide right after his wife died, right? Because he had to be at work, because he was still needed at work. And so it wasn't until work let him go, and that's when he felt like nobody in the world needed him anymore, right? And so that was his decision to commit suicide. So in Parvana making him feel useful, and in like making him useful in all of these other people's lives, it didn't change his core personality. I feel like it just brought out that trait.
Okay, no, yes, and I actually really like that. I hadn't ever thought of that aspect of it, the useful versus useless part of Uva, and that did happen with Parvana, that she gave that back to him, a purpose. I guess what I'm thinking more of is, well, let's take the character of Jimmy, who's lived in the apartment complex for a long time, and Sonia had kind of befriended him and brought him meals and had this relationship with him. Uva had nothing to do with him. But then by the end of the book, they are friends, and I feel like Uva had let himself soften a little bit towards people, and I hadn't seen that with Sonia.
I think his outside exterior was still pretty gruff.
I think that is true.
So actually, I think it was a two-way. I think it was the people around him learning how to get past the gruff exterior, because that didn't necessarily ever go away. But it was also, you're right. It was also him.
Yeah. I think definitely, even 5 years after he's met Parvana, I think if he went into the iPad store, he's still going to act the same. So I don't feel like he changed in that way, but I do feel like he grew a little bit more accepting of people and developed these friendships that he didn't really have before, which I think was totally believable, except that I feel like he was married to Sonia for so long, and she had a very similar personality to Parvana. And so I'm wondering why he didn't have that relationship with Jimmy already based on Sonia. But I like your thoughts. Yeah, that's giving me a whole new insight into his life. I like that.
Well, but on the note of marriage, let's talk about the marriage dynamic.
Okay. Yeah.
In this book, because there are fascinating marriages in this book, and the most fascinating being Uva's and Sonia's, because they are such polar opposites. So I'm thinking about this now, that a possible explanation to your question is Uva didn't change with Sonia because Sonia was that half of him, so he didn't have to, right? Like Sonia, he was the black and white, she was all the color in the world. Mm-hmm. And so he didn't ever need to. She didn't
change himself.
Right. Because she was him. She was that part of him. He didn't have to actually go for himself.
Whereas Parvana is more of a friend. I mean, they're not married. At the very end, they're more like probably father and daughter, not ever like spouses. And so that's probably true, that he maybe didn't feel as much like he needed to reach outside himself. He's like, well, Sonia's taking care of that part.
Right.
Whereas Parvana didn't let him get away with that at all. She's like, no, you need to do this. And that's a fascinating thing about Sonia, because she's dead in the book. We only get to know her through flashbacks, but she is a fascinating character in that she is so different from Uva. She's so opposite of him. So what did she see in him? And why did she stay with him? Why did she love him? Why did she stay with him? And why didn't she make him change? Right? Why didn't she make him be more outgoing or friendly? Or why did she ask that of him? Yeah, I think in part she did understand him as a person right from the start. I think she could see into his core and could see like his good heart, that he was honest, that he was very faithful and loyal, and
just loved him unconditionally and never asked him to change. Beautiful thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think the relationship or the marriage, Parvana's marriage to Patrick is a very, very interesting one.
It is.
I mean, so they're more similar.
It's so funny.
Yeah, he's definitely extroverted like she is, but I don't know. I actually had issues with the character of Patrick because I felt like Frederick Bachman never gave us a real reason to connect with Patrick. You know, he was just always known as the lucky one. He was always kind of the bumbling fool who was clumsy and having problems and kind of the source of all of the eye rolling between Parvana and Ove. And
I know that was his role. His function
that was his role.
A person that both Parvana and Ove could mock together.
Yes.
Which it was like, what? A wife should not be doing.
Yeah.
So that was kind of funny at the same time.
Yeah, that one was a little bit harder for me because I don't know. I felt like I should have liked Patrick too.
Wasn't a fleshed out enough character.
Yeah, I mean, I did like him. There was nothing to not like about him. I just kind of felt sorry for him. Like he was the brunt of everyone's joke, and we didn't really ever get to know him. I mean, half the time, no one can even remember his name. It's just the lanky one. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. It is an interesting marriage. But as Ube points out, she must love him enough to
right
to procreate with, to bear his offspring.
Yeah.
His genes in the gene pool.
I think that was my problem. I was like, there is more to Patrick than meets the eye. I mean, he's obviously like a very supportive person and can really keep a sense of humor and is extremely optimistic. I mean, I think that opening scene where he's driving the car where he shouldn't be, the trailer, and trying to back it up and running into things, but he's just so grateful for Uva's help. You know, he doesn't take any of Uva's insults
personally. I know.
And so I really did like that about him. Yeah.
There's a lot to like about him, but I agree. He's maybe not the most fleshed out character in the book.
Right. So, well, before we run out of time, I really did want to talk about Parvana a little bit more. So she meets Ove as her husband's trying to back up the trailer, and she's really upset with her husband for ruining things, and she and Ove connect a little bit that way. Yeah. But she's very aggressive towards Ove. I mean, aggressive in that she's like, I want you to do this for me, and drive
me to the hospital now.
And at the same time, though, I actually think there are a couple of moments where I think she picked up on what was happening. Like, I think she realized that Ove was trying to, especially once she sees him in the garage with the exhaust running.
Right. No.
I think she knew by that point.
And I think her response is interesting. Like, obviously it was perfect. Obviously it was exactly what Ube needed. Her response, like, she didn't report to authorities, and she didn't, I don't know what other people would have, like, I don't know what I would have done in that situation if I had realized that my neighbor was trying to commit suicide. I mean, like, I would call police, right? I'd be like, someone else needs to come in and take care of this. Anyway, so you're right, her response is not mine, and it was perfect, but it was also
very invasive.
Invasive, yeah. And like, if I had been Ube, I legitimately would have been annoyed. Like,
I would have too. Yeah. And so I've thought a lot about her, about just if I don't know if
it's appropriate. I mean, like, it works out in the end, right? But it might not have worked.
Right. Or even if, like, this is even a realistic thing to have happen, that Ube, who doesn't like her and doesn't like being pushed around and doesn't like his life being looked into, would form this friendship. And I mean, it does take time. That's the thing. I mean, it takes time, although in the long run, it actually doesn't take that much time, because it's 3 weeks from meeting until he's buying her daughter an iPad for her birthday. So So I don't know. I think there's a little bit of, liberty taken there that we have to just suspend a little bit of disbelief that this is working out. But I think also there was kind of this instant connection that is somewhat believable, that they did have some similar personalities. I don't know if that, there were some personality similarities is what I'm trying to say between them. Like they were annoyed at very similar things.
And she seemed to understand certain things about him. And that's actually, that was one of my, when the book was over, I was like, so in real life, I may have been super annoyed with the character, with Parvana, with someone like that. But also, like as an introvert myself, I am definitely an introvert myself and definitely related to Ove that way. I do appreciate people who make the concerted effort to get past my introvertedness and make friends, because it takes work for other people. It does, because I don't naturally open up. And so I was like, I am grateful for people like that who do persevere in forming a friendship with me, because otherwise I tend to
that's true
give up on friendships really easily.
I agree with that. And I also think Ove, as much as he wanted to die and wanted to be with Sonia again, it was almost like he was looking for a way out too, lots of times, because he would get everything ready and then he'd be like, oh well, I guess I better follow through with helping out this person.
With his responsibilities.
So I think in a way he was hoping for a way to be useful again and looking for that way out. So yeah, interesting.
So in the end, what's going to be your takeaway from this book? What's your most like? This is the moment, or this is the idea, or this is the.
Well, we've talked about a lot of them already. I think just the way Ove changes. Well, not changes, because I agree with you. He doesn't change. His personality doesn't change. But yes, I mean, just the whole development of that is beautiful. But I think one of the moments in the book where I really did get a little bit emotional and also just felt really connected with Ove and Sonia was, right after their, she's had the accident, her baby dies, she's paralyzed, and he is so angry about it and just looking for a way to make things fair and make things right. And of course, there's no way to make a situation like that right, because it's just irreversible. But Sonia says, and tell me if you remember this, but she says, we can busy ourselves with living or dying. And that is kind of the theme of the book, I feel like, to me. There's this whole balance between living and dying, and this, I mean, the whole book, he's trying to commit suicide, but he's also developing these relationships and helping people and finding a reason to live again. I think it's all kind of summed up in that statement from Sonia. We can either busy ourselves with living or dying. And at that point in their lives, they chose to live. And I think by the end of the book, he chooses to live again. And it's just really beautiful. So what was your favorite moment? Or the most impactful moment?
So, I don't know if it's a moment so much as, but just what we talked about earlier, that idea of you can't judge people because you don't know the backstory. I think that's a pretty powerful takeaway from this. That, right, like that, me disliking Ove on the first page, but then like learning his backstory and all this by the end of the book, just like, no, I want every person to be Ove, like if the world would be a better place if every man were like Ove and had his principles and his, like this is a good man. So anyway, just that sort of change in my perspective is, that's a great perspective for life, that you just can't judge people based on your passing interaction with them. But there is a life story and that there is a lot of goodness behind some grumpy old men.
Yes. Totally.
Anyway, yeah, that's a pretty powerful lesson from the book.
I know. I totally agree. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just a really sweet story. So if anyone hasn't read it yet that's watching this, well, you shouldn't have listened to this whole thing, but you should read it. You
gotta read it.
If you've read it, you should tell all your friends about it.
It's a pretty early perfect book in my opinion.
Yeah.
It is pretty up there.
Right. For sure. Well, so for our book recommendation segment, we thought it would be fun today to recommend a book similar to A Man Called Ove. So basically, if you like A Man Called Ove, here would be a couple of other recommendations that you might also enjoy. And I'm interested to hear what you decided to recommend, Suzanne.
All right, so my pick is The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Rachel Joyce. Have you read this one?
I haven't.
I don't know when it was written, maybe like 2012. I feel like it came out just a few years ago. It's decently recent. Anyway, okay, so this book is not as perfect as A Man Called Ove. It's not the same level, so we won't do that. But it has a lot of similar. It's once again about an old man, which I'm starting to love these books about old men. They're so great. So it's a book about an old man who his friend. He gets a letter from an old friend and finds out that she's in a care home on the other side of the country. It takes place in England, care home on the other side of the country, and that she's dying of cancer. And he has regrets about the way that this relationship with this friend ended. And so he writes out a sympathy card and takes it to the mailbox and just feels terrible that, like a sympathy card's not enough. And so maybe it'll be enough if I actually walk it to the post office downtown. He gets to the post office downtown and he's like, no, I just need to do something more for this person, and just keeps walking all the way to the north of England to hand deliver this card.
Oh, wow.
I know. It's kind of completely spur of the moment thing. And he's like not even wearing walking shoes. And anyway, and his wife's back home. Where is my husband? Anyway. He meets a fantastic cast of people along the way, some that you love, some that you hate, and it's another one of those, like, you slowly learn his backstory about his marriage and some tragic things in his past, and you learn more about him. And it's so anyway, similar along those lines, and it is really good. It's really sweet. It was one of those that at a moment I was like it. I was like, this is so stupid. It's like, why is he just walking? Anyway, but by the end of it, I was like, it didn't end in the place I expected it to end. It was a lot deeper and more sweet. And anyway, I really enjoyed it. So definitely recommend.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think I will definitely read that.
Thanks. So I'm excited to hear yours.
Oh yeah. So okay, mine is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. Have you read this one?
I have read it.
Okay. Would you ever compare the two? Do you think?
Oh, I mean, like, it's about an old man.
Well, okay, so A.J. Fikry actually isn't an old man.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, so he's
a bit younger.
Yeah, when the book starts,
I feel like he's old.
Right, he has an old man personality. I know. So in a lot of ways, he's very similar to Ove. I think when the book starts, he's in his 30s, maybe early 40s. But I mean, I would still consider him fairly. No, I think he has to be in his 30s. Anyway, he owns a bookstore, and his wife had died 18 months before, and so it's similar in that way. But then he also just has this very gruff exterior. He's also a very black and white person. There's some things. He only likes certain kinds of books, like they can't be over 400 pages. They can't be under 150 pages. He doesn't like children's books about orphans. I mean, so he has very definite views of what is right and wrong. And he doesn't care about people's opinions. So, he's not catering to people, which kind of makes it so that his bookstore is not thriving as much as it did when his wife was alive, because he doesn't care. And then some circumstances happen where he meets a book rep comes. She's a new one, and she's they get off to a rough start, but eventually they become friends. And then also this little girl is actually abandoned in his bookstore with a note attached to her that just says something like, I want my daughter to be raised among books, or something like that. And of course, AJ has no desire to become a father, but he does. he takes this little girl, and so it's kind of a similar process. And yeah, it's not, AJ himself is not as endearing as Ove by any means, I don't think, by the end.
But he redeems him. He does have redeeming qualities.
Oh yeah, he does. And I feel like he definitely does change by the end of the book. You know, he's become a very different person. But it's a good one too for just people who like books, because books play a huge part in it, and lots of book references. And so it's a good story too. So that was the one I thought of, and I was so proud of myself for thinking of it. And then I was at the library finding it, like just searching for it in the database, and it came up with recommendations. If you like the storied life of AJ Vickery, try A Man Called Ove. And I was like, oh my goodness. Well, that wasn't so original after all, but there it is.
That's all right. Well, you thought of it yourself.
I know. I did.
All right. Well, we would want to thank all of you so much for joining us and watching. And as a reminder, we will post this video, since I don't think anybody was able to watch this on our blogs. We'll post this video along with our show notes over the next few days, at some point in the next few days. And just as a reminder, I'm Suzanne from Such Stuff Books, and our lovely host is Amy of SomeLitPages.com, and we'll be back next month with another fun show on some bookish topic.
And hopefully no technical difficulties. Everyone, cross your fingers.
I know. It's always a dread.
Yep. Okay, well, have a good night.
See you next month.
All right, see ya. Bye.